From the South Carolina School Boards Association, I'm Scott Price, SCSBA Executive Director, and welcome to the Voice of School Boards. It's in the complex world of public education that school board members find themselves squarely at the forefront. From the loftiness of policy development and having a vision for schools to the rudiments of budget developing and building classrooms, school board members are tasked with addressing the challenges and inequities in education. Oftentimes, in the process of doing so, school board members' voices and that of other local leaders become a whisper. The goal of this podcast is to educate, amplify, and engage in a civil discourse on where we've been in education, where we are now, and where we hope to go in the future. Along the way, we'll meet some very interesting people and also have a little fun. Okay, I'm going to welcome to this episode of Voice of School Boards Representative Shannon Erickson, who is the chair of the House Education and Public Works Committee. And Chair Erickson, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me here.
So you all are in, week 4 now or week 5 of the session?
We just wrapped up 4, so this is starting 5.
Starting week 5. And it seems like it's been longer than 5 weeks because you all really hit the ground running this year. It's the second year of a 2-year session. So some of the things that carried over from this previous year. So what has your committee, what has the education committee been focusing on at the very offset?
You know, we picked up some things that we didn't get to finish last year. We'll be doing a little bit more of that. Tackled a couple of special education pieces, the advisory committees for our local groups. You'll hear me talk about that a lot. Our dual enrollment credits, we're going to go back and take a look at those. Workforce development, tying our course credits to job-ready students. Representative Fawn Pedalino and I are working on true grading systems so that we're not seeing students with grades that aren't exactly from the work that they're doing on testing. But a lot of it is a hurry up and wait kind of situation, sadly. We're waiting on legislation from the Senate. We've sent things to the Senate last year that we're waiting on them passing. So for education, we've got a huge cleanup on higher education that bill will be heard in committee, I believe, Tuesday. So a lot of things we've been working on the off session. We're now having legislation that are rolling out piece by piece, but a lot of it is work. We cranked out a lot of stuff last year that didn't make it over from the Senate. So that's going to be a big move for us.
If I may just dig down a little bit deeper into, because I think you had the true grading system bill that's actually on committee or subcommittee this week.
It is, yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
We've heard from teachers and parents and administrators alike that having students graded on some of our benchmarks instead of their actual grades on their tests, things that the teachers are using for formative assessments aren't always the best thing to show a grade for because they're in progress. It's to show them that they're in progress and help them with where the lesson plans and that student's work needs to head. And we want to make sure that we're not having those formative assessments lean into the actual graded assignments and let the true grade be something that parents can see as predictable because they're not always going to see those assessment grades. If we're using those to plot, we shouldn't also be using those in a grade. Those are feedback driven, and some teachers are using it, some districts are using it, and there's just kind of a mixed bag. And that really is, for me, there's most of the work that policy-wise needs to be done in schools. A lot of it's driven from our local school boards, and you guys know how much I appreciate y'all for the work you have to do on those levels. But this type of an issue is something that we need a statewide standard for. And that's why Representative Pellegrino and I both had different pieces of it. We took our pieces and combined them and have one bill and actually have a huge number of sponsors from it. So that also tells us that it's something that everybody is hearing about. And since we've heard about it from all levels, I think it's going to be a common sense piece as we move the legislation through.
Well, and I love the way a common sense piece because that doesn't always apply. So
No, it doesn't.
I
No.
appreciate you. That tells
Well,
a lot when you think something's a common sense piece.
Well, I tell you what we're doing. We're listening to parents, teachers, and administrators, and if all of them are seeing the same problem, chances are it's a real problem. So the state needs to step in and make a standard rule so that everybody knows what has to happen in those areas, and parents can have that predictability, and administrators can say this is the policy.
Well, let me ask you that because you see this as in your capacity as chair of the education committee. How different it seems to me that it can be very difficult sometimes to look at developing statewide policy that basically you lay it down over different districts and they're all different and its application can be very different in each district. So that how do you account for that?
Well, it's probably one of the toughest parts of the job, isn't it? To discern what needs to be a state level regulation or policy versus what needs to be decided by your local schools. And I think this grading piece is a perfect example. We need to make sure that the grading policies are the same everywhere so that South Carolina is reporting apples to apples. Now, how you decide what formative assessments you're using and when you're using them in your district, that's school board and superintendent and administration policy. You know, we give parameters for how often they're given, but you also have a choice on the local level which one of those choices you want to employ. And that really, I think, is kind of the cut of the entire piece is what needs to be the state level, and then how do you take it and use it on the local level. And we should not be picking out the exact specific assessments that you're using. We should give a list of the ones that we find the criteria meet our state standards, and then let you choose on your local level what works best for your students in your area. And that, I think, is how we should step away and say, that's a local decision. These are the ones that meet the state standards. You choose from that point forward.
Well, and I want to thank you for the special attention that you pay to local decision making, local control, because that is key in many instances that districts and boards have that flexibility. And I know that you all do focus on that a great deal.
We try really hard. And being a classroom teacher, I understand that there's a lot of things that are above that classroom teacher that they feel like are not in their control. Their feedback on things locally, that's very important for your school board and your school administrators to be able to work with. They need the feedback from those local teachers on what's happening specifically in their classroom. I might hear that sometimes, but usually if it rises to our level, it's going to end up being something that we need to look at the state level. And that's why people need to know who their school boards are. They need to know who those members are.
And who they're electing.
That's right. Very important jobs.
Yeah,
Yes.
it is. You mentioned administrators, teachers, school boards. And again, I've always appreciated the relationship that our organization has with you and your office. And I feel like we can at least talk about things. And I think that's very important. But how much input do you get on any particular issue, education related, when it comes to, and I've been to subcommittee hearings and things like that where you invite testimony, but I know also that you have separate input.
I get a lot, Scott. I get probably 300 to 400 emails a day. A lot of those are focused generally on our K-12 education system. They are from parents. They are from educators. Sometimes it's from my superintendent. Sometimes it's from my school board members. Sometimes it's from Greenville or Spartanburg or Horry County. A lot of them are inquiries. They're questions about how something comes about or how they can influence change on something. So a lot of that goes to research, staff looking at things and figuring out how something did come to be and why there are questions around it, and if we can solve those questions with knowing the backstory. Because there's always a story on how something came to be. But there's also the ones that come with a specific problem, something that they have encountered as a parent or an educator or an administrator that, and I'm gonna use the line again, that doesn't make sense. They come to me and say, Shannon, I'm applying common sense and this doesn't make sense. And that is where I try to dig in, because if I hear from one, chances are I'm going to start to hear it from others. And that's how it rolls. I'll hear from one school board member, and then I'll hear from three, and then another district will encounter the same thing. And they help us find things that aren't working well. And that is hugely important. I also meet with school board members either by just picking up the phone and talking, or we'll have coffee, or they'll have an event in our local districts.
Well, so let me ask you something. How do you balance? Because so often you see legislation that gets filed or a proviso that gets proposed, and it's the result of either one incident or something that just somebody didn't feel like was handled the way it should have been. How do you balance between, okay, well, let's just fix this at the source as opposed to putting in statewide legislation?
I think you've got to look at the parameters of what that single instance is. Does it actually have the potential to make a larger mark during the months that we're gone? Because that really, for a proviso specifically, when we're in session from the second week of January through the second week of May, there's more year that we are not able to help fix a problem than the weeks that we are actually able to work. So if we find something comes to us that's a problem that has the potential, it's up to us to do some really fast homework. And you guys are really helpful in that. Let me put a big pitch out to you guys, because your association helps us kind of vet some of those things and bring to the table, wait a minute, is this one issue with one particular school or one particular district that we can solve right here with just getting the right people at the table? Or is this something that we need to put a patch on until we can come back, debate the full issue, and come up with the fix that we need to put into the entire system? And that is when we need the experts at the table. I'm not the only expert in the room. I might be one in a small amount of things.
You're the only one that matters.
Well, that's not true. I am chronically collaborative. I want everybody at the table as many times as I can have them there. I think you know that. I probably drive y'all nuts with how often I ask for your feedback.
We appreciate it.
Well, but that's how we get a good product, and that's how we serve the people best, is if we do all the homework we can before we make a decision. Now, does that mean that I have the last say on any proviso that goes in the budget? Absolutely not. I'm not on the Ways and Means Committee, and I'm not the budget chairman, and I'm not Speaker of the House. But I can give impact in my opinion and with the associations like yours that help us get to some kind of sound judgment call on what's happening. And I'm very lucky in the House and in the Senate, very strong colleagues who are willing to be collaborative too. And they are good listeners, and we really have a good working relationship. So I think we've actually cut down on the number of patches that we've needed because we've tried to be proactive. But given the system and how it cuts off mid-year, and when you start back into school in the fall, we're not in session. We try to make sure we've covered some of our gaps there by some of those provisos, but they don't need to stay long-term law unless they're truly needed.
Yeah, sometimes to get a proviso in there that just never, ever, ever goes away. And I remember back in the bad old days when we had Part 2 provisos.
Yeah.
That was always a little scary because that did go into.
A couple of years ago, we actually cleaned up a lot of the provisos, and either Chairman Bannister worked hard to take the ones that had been in and were useful and necessary and put them in to codified law, and the rest of them we've either phased out or we took out immediately. Yes.
So getting back to some of the legislation that you mentioned that you're looking at, are there any priorities for Representative Shannon Erickson that you want to touch on this year?
Probably number one on the list has got to be charter school authorizer and systems reform. I've been working on the pinch points that we see in the House. The Senate actually was moving the bill last year, and they're going to debate that this week, I believe.
Yeah, they gave it priority order.
They did. So I am hopeful. I believe they even are going to be amending on third reading with some of the LAC report that we received over the off session. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what that bill has in it. Now, I've got the framework for what the House thinks needs to be in our version. So once we get what they pass, that's going to be priority number one for us to go and work through and make sure that what we see is in there and that it's tight enough and that gives the charter schools the needed tweaks. We haven't done this in several years. And the charter world has just changed a lot since our law is not even relevant in some areas. So we have to have discussions about EMOs and authorizers and all kinds of things. But that's got to be priority number one.
That's a Senate bill, correct?
That's a Senate bill, yes. Okay. Yes. After that, we're looking truly, I think our grading piece and the special education piece that came out of our subcommittee last week. This is step one for me. Special education, special needs students. Look, we all have special needs. They just vary in degree. And those students that need the most assistance aren't always the ones who are getting the most help. And we've got to do a better job. We've got to help our teachers on the front end. We need to make sure they've got well-trained and high-quality assistants in those classrooms. Parents need to be able to trust what's going on in the classrooms. And we need to really look at the degree that we are putting assets and resources into special education. So the first thing we noticed was there's a state level special needs advisory council, but there's nothing on our district levels. Now, some districts may have just parents who have special needs children on, say, their PTO or other parent groups, but there's no group that specifically looks at what's happening in each of the districts and gives any feedback. So that bill sets up those advisory councils on each district, and then they will report to the state district, and then we will have grassroots synergy on what problems we're seeing that will, and I'm going to revisit the topic we just talked about, what needs to be policy on the state level and what needs to be policy on our local levels and what we need to be enhancing in those different areas. But that grassroots involvement has to happen before I think any of us feels good about just deciding what real change looks like. Right. So that's step number one. And after that, I hope we have a great amount of data coming into our state level. I know Superintendent Weaver is really looking forward to that. We've had many discussions on this. So that's really number two for me. Number three is budget related. I'm going to be watchdogging our teacher pay increases. That's been a priority for our committee and Ways and Means for several years here now. You know, I was on that committee. I was on Ways and Means when we started the move to get those salaries up and our starting teacher salaries moving at a good rate. And I want to see that done. I know the governor does too. So I'm going to be watchdogging those education funding dollars for our districts, our students, our teachers, charter schools, our special needs across the board. That's going to come up as next in priority. And then efficiencies. The efficiencies that I'm talking about, making sure that our workforce, our students are getting the courses they need to be ready. And one of those is going to be that workforce ready piece where we require districts to get the remediation done for English or math at the high school level, not push it to remediation on our college level. We've got too many students doing English 100 or math 100. We need to do that on our senior years instead of us having to force parents to pay for that in those college course credits. So that's going to be really big. Those efficiencies are huge. And some districts are doing it well, some districts are not. And we need to see why it's working one area and not the other. And we've got legislation, hopefully, that will help that.
Thank you. And you mentioned Superintendent Weaver, you mentioned the governor. And by the way, you all are to be congratulated legislatively in terms of the strong support that you've had for teacher salaries over the years, legislatively, school safety. And I know that's something the governor has pushed and that you all have been on board with. So thank you all for that. But there's a lot of fingers in the pie, the education pie in South Carolina. You've got the State Board of Education, you've got the EOC, the State Department of Education, Senate Education Committee, House Education Committee, governor, speaker. There's a lot of fingers in the pie. How do you all collaborate?
So Chairman Whitmire, who is the chairman of the K-12 Education Subcommittee on Ways and Means, his district is number one. My district is number 124. So he's the yin and I'm the yang. And we're both former educators.
Right.
So it is super. And we've worked together. I've served on his committee and served on Ways and Means with him. We go over every bit of the budget. And I also try to either sit in on his committee meetings or I'm at the very least, I'm watching them as they're live streamed. It really helps for the money and the policy to be balanced and working together. That's been something that I've been very proud of, to be able to bring that experience on Ways and Means and to be able to help Mr. Whitmire with the policy piece that he's working on in the budget. And he likewise for me. Senator Hembry over in the Senate, he and I meet regularly to go over legislation, discuss what's going on. I cannot thank Superintendent Weaver enough for how many times she reaches in, talks to us about ideas, talks to us about what she's seeing needs to be, or saying bills that we have she'd like to see tweaked or added to. That energy from the governor's office. I mean, this governor has been a governor who has supported education. He supports children just about better than any governor I have seen. And he supports the classrooms as well.
Right.
And when you do both of those things, then families are going to benefit. And that's what he knows. Because if there's one thing Governor McMaster will tell you, South Carolina is special because of its people.
Yep.
And the people working on education right now for the state, the synergy that all pieces have has never been as strong as it is right this minute. And I think the dividends are really showing. I think we're showing that we're getting good things done. We're supporting education. More funding is going to our classrooms, to our teachers, and to our students, and more supports of, time is money.
Yep.
How are we helping our students get further faster? How are we helping teachers? Well, we did our teachers no longer have to waste time doing recertification. We've tried to lower the paperwork so that they can focus their time on what they'd like to do, and that's teaching. Yeah. So all of those things together, that synergy has been some really big wins for our state.
Awesome. We're getting towards the end here, but I did want to ask you about your journey to where you are today as chair of the House Education Committee. I seem to recall when you were over there doing governmental relations before you were even in the House. And so tell me about your journey to where you are now.
I ended up at the State House working on regulations that dealt with early childhood education. And again, I guess the theme of my talk today is going to be common sense. The regulations didn't match what we know to be common sense. And even worse, they didn't match good development for children. And I spoke up and asked for some changes. And the governor at the time, Mark Sanford, put me on an early childhood advisory committee. And I ended up working at the State House, speaking out on behalf of families and children and what was good practice for early childhood education. Fast forward to our House seat coming open, kind of an odd turn of events. And I looked around and thought, I'm not any smarter than the average bear, but I do know how the system works. And I think I bring a good view of education and specifically early childhood to the table. And I'd run a business, so I understand how to sign the front, not just the back of a paycheck, and balance things. So my skill set led me to that world. I read regulations very, very well and can work in that stratus. That put me on labor, commerce, and industry for several years. And then because of the balancing of a budget for payroll for 28 years, I was moved to Ways and Means and have helped balance the budget at the State House. And then when the Education and Public Works Committee came open, the speaker moved me there because it was the culmination of my regulatory world, transportation and public works, and the education world's kind of strangely my skill set. So people always ask me, why is it education and public works? I'm not sure, but it's really both wheelhouses for how I've maneuvered through my work in the private sector and in the public sector. It's an honor to serve. It's an honor to serve the people.
And I can't think of any committee that's more important in terms of education and public works. That's probably,
It is. I work on the roads and public safety and DMV, and I've got higher ed, and K through 12,
Yeah.
early childhood, and special education. I think I cover a lot of things that matter to people.
Well, you certainly do. And I thank you for the work that you do. And I thank you for the relationship that you have with the folks that are boots on the ground in education. And that includes School Boards Association. And I appreciate your common sense approach. You don't always see that nowadays. So we thank you for that. Anything that you'd like to add we've covered a lot of ground today.
I want to let folks know that often our school board races are overlooked, or somebody feels they're not important. I cannot think of any more important public servants than those people who serve on our school boards on our local level and make things happen for those schools, those children, those teachers in the classroom. So I'm just going to put a pitch. Please consider, anybody listening, please consider that you have a voice and that you are worthy, you are important, and what you have to say matters. Consider running for school board. Consider putting your input into that process, because it takes us all. It's a collaborative effort, and without good people who care about education and care about children, then we don't keep improving. And school boards are the first line for our kids. And if we put kids first, we need great school boards. And we've got good people serving, but I know a lot of times there are the jobs that people think, oh, that's so much work and it's so little gratification. Well, just know that there are a lot of little people out there who love you for doing it.
Wow. That's very well said, and I appreciate you making that pitch. And so, again, joining us today, Representative Shannon Erickson, the Chair of the House Education and Public Works Committee. And Chair Erickson, thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for being on this episode of Voice of School Boards.
It's an honor. Thank you, Scott. See you at the State House.
See you soon.
Bye.
And that's it for this episode of the Voice for School Boards. Thank you for sharing your time with us, and we'll see you soon.